What's good, yo? Today I wanted to talk about something that I think is really cool, which are cars built for the track that you can drive on the road. Now, I want to talk about that term race car for the road a little bit. I hear that phrase get thrown around a lot, which, makes a lot of sense because there are like different levels to what a race car for the road would be. If you got yourself a Honda Civic, gutted it, put a cage and a bucket seat in it, and poured a ton of money into the suspension and some power mods so you can tear it up at your local track day, all while still being registered and insured, I think it would be fair to call this car a race car for the road. This is probably the most surface level race car for the road, believe it or not. You see, this isn't exactly out of the ordinary, at least in the car world. I've seen plenty of cars that have been modified extensively for track use that are still technically road legal, and in some psychotic cases, daily driven. Taking a car that wasn't really meant for the track and turning it into something that it isn't all that crazy or mind-blowing. It is still very, very cool, don't get me wrong. But I would even say that this type of thing is like to be expected. Someone altering a car to this point is like, pretty normal, obviously. But to have a car like this come out of a manufacturer just straight out of the factory, that is kind of where things get a little more interesting. Now with the next level of race car for the road, we start to get closer to what I really want to talk about. This is when we start to transition from cars that regular people in the public built into race cars to cars that already got pretty close to that status, straight from the factory. This would be like your Porsche RS cars, the Lamborghini Huracan STO, the Dodge Viper ACRX, cars like that. These cars are absolute monsters on the track that use research and technology taken from motorsport to develop a car that can set crazy lap times and take it to Walmart. Calling these cars street legal starts to kind of be a stretch at this point. The suspension is stiff and harsh, the exhaust is noisy, and the added air on some of these makes these a little harder to drive around town without scraping on everything. From a performance and honestly from a visual standpoint, I would definitely say that it would be fair to call these race cars for the road too. But these still aren't quite what I want to talk about. A couple things. Firstly, this is still kind of expected. Yes, these are much more aggressive and track focused compared to their more chill versions. But I mean, if you think about a Porsche or a Lamborghini, you're still going to be expecting something that's fast anyways. Not only that, but these cars are obviously still very different from their actual race car counterparts. They have full interiors and most of the tech and creature comforts you'd expect from an expensive road legal luxury sports car. So then you might be wondering, but track, well, what could possibly be more extreme than these? How far do we have to go? And to answer that, we're gonna have to talk about something called homologation. In racing, homologation refers to the rules set by the FIA, which is the main governing body for a large amount of motorsport classes and divisions. These rules are put in place to ensure an even playing field, and they can dictate things like the size of the engine, the car's wheelbase, the ride height of the car, and many other things. Now, the reason this is important is because of a very particular rule in the book: production number requirements. You see, for many racing disciplines, the FIA requires teams and manufacturers to race one of their production models. This means a car that is available to the public. And the FIA has a requirement for how many of these cars must be produced, which depends on the discipline. Some of the higher end classes only require a handful of cars to be made, while some rally classes might require thousands. This creates an interesting situation where manufacturers need to build a car that is competitive on the track, but also available to the public. These cars are called homologation specials. Now, us car guys, we love homologation. Thanks to this rule, we have access to some of the most iconic sports cars out there. A few of these include the BMW E30 M3, the Mitsubishi Lancer Evo, the WRX Impreza STI, the Audi Sport Quattro, the 911 Carrera RS, Lancia, and many, many more. If we really want to find a true race car for the road, this is definitely where we need to be. But with that said, many of the road-going versions of these are still dulled down in some way or another compared to the race car versions. And Evo still has to be enjoyable to drive around town in order for people to want to buy it. I don't think sales would be too good if this car had no interior or air conditioning. But there's a certain class of race cars where the manufacturers, decided to take a few liberties with this rule. A discipline where they're not worried about how many units they can sell. No, instead, what the real concern is, what the real priority is winning. I'm talking about GT1.
Solid run here. This is, I'm sorry, that is
FIA Group GT1 class was formed in 1993 and lasted all the way until the beginning of 2012. But those early years in the mid to late 90s is what most people remember it for. This was the peak for the class, where the rules were still a little blurry and teams weren't too afraid to take some risks. I almost consider this like the Group B of touring cars. Many teams were able to do pretty much whatever they wanted, so cars kept getting faster and more dangerous, and eventually the FIA had to step in to calm everything down, just like with Group B rally racing. Coming into the late 90s, the competition was intense, and teams were putting a ton of research and development into trying to make the fastest car on the grid. And as you can imagine, these cars were very expensive to make. So for these teams, having to make a few production versions of these cars was more of an inconvenience, and they only made just enough to get the green light from the FIA. Most of them did it because they had to, not really because they wanted to. That's the reason why we have production cars from this class, where the only difference between them and their racetrack counterparts or like an airbag on the steering wheel and a couple cats on the exhaust. They also know that the only people who would buy one of these are true enthusiasts who knew what they were getting into. So there was no point in dumping more money into these to make them all luxurious and comfy and lovely to drive. In the early stages of GT1 though, things weren't as crazy yet, and there were a couple cars that did come out of this time that the manufacturers made because they wanted to. These cars are the exact definition of a race car for the road. But let's take a look at some examples so we can see what I mean. In the early days, no one was quite so sure about how much the rules could be bent yet, so a lot of the cars from this time period were modified versions of an existing car. This means that meeting the homologation requirements wasn't as stressful as a task, since the cars being raced already existed. Probably one of the most normal examples of this era would be the Jaguar XJ220. I love these, honestly. They're probably the coolest car Jaguar has ever made, in my opinion. It just sucks that we never got the V12 in it that Jag originally promised because, you know, they were broke. Jaguar raced this car in a couple different series, of course including GT1, with the XJ220 GT. And as you might expect, this was a stripped down, extremely modified version of the standard 220, which, you know, for the time, it was very luxurious. The road-going version, while still being an expensive and flashy exotic car, was still very much a car that was pretty easy to drive on the street. Now, things really started to get fun when Ferrari decided to join in with their F40. This car is an absolute supercar icon from the 80s. It's an absolute driver's car, and even the regular version of the F40 was still a pretty raw experience. So it probably wasn't too hard to strip out whatever was left to make the car even more insane on the track. Now, Jaguar, as we know, is a luxury car maker, and I think for them, maintaining that image was very important, which is why we didn't get a road legal stripped down track version of the XJ220. But Ferrari doesn't care. They know their target audience. They know that the people who want this car want it because it's almost a race car. So Ferrari figured, why not just give them the race car? So in 1994, Ferrari gave us the F40 LM. This is exactly what you would expect from a true race car. Stripped interior, fixed bucket seats with a 5-point harness, no radio, no AC, no airbags, no driving aids, stiff, harsh suspension, a roll cage in the interior, center lock wheels, all the luxury and comforts that you would typically want from a road car completely removed in favor for on-track performance. And yet, you can register this car and take it to the grocery store if you really wanted to, all while listening to the amazing sound of the 720 horsepower 2.9 liter twin turbo V8. You love to see it, honestly, okay? They literally just took the car they used to race, did just enough to it to make it street legal, and put it out there. And I'm here for it, okay? I saw one myself in real life once at a Cars and Coffee. It was Supercar Ron's. You know, before the semi-truck sideswiped it. Now this next car largely follows the same blueprint as the F40 LM, but it's also the car that changed the course of GT1 and gave us some of the really insane cars later on. Probably one of the most iconic and well-known cars of the 90s GT1 era was the McLaren F1 GTR. This was the first of what I would call the 3 GT1 icons to come around. This car is powered by the 6.1 liter BMW S70 V12, and with homologation restrictions was limited to 600 horsepower. One of the most defining characteristics, and probably, you know, one of the most famous features of the F1 is the center mounted driver's seat, which was put there to give the driver the best point of view while racing. Just like with the F40, McLaren already had the F1, so all they had to do was a few modifications to it. And this car was an instant hit. McLaren dominated the track with the F1 GTR, and when they took the win at the 1995 24 Hours of Le Mans, they decided to celebrate. I imagine that they had like the whole team out in like downtown Paris drinking and partying, and someone on the team must have said, "Man, this car is so amazing. I love that car so much. I wish I could just take it out and go cruising around town with it." And someone at McLaren must have heard that and said, "You know what?
Master switch."
The F1 LM. No airbags, no luxurious interior controls, no traction control or ABS, any of that. And the sound of the engine and straight cut gears in the transmission are so loud in the cabin because of the lack of any interior sound deadening that there are headsets in the interior to protect your ears and so you can talk to your passengers if you have any. And as if it couldn't get any more crazy, with no rules regarding power restrictions, McLaren was able to bump up the power just a little bit, just a tiny bit, keeping it at a very modest 668 horsepower. They really took the race car version, gave it more power, and said, throw some turn signals and road tires on it, whatever. And that was seemingly good enough for everyone, including me. This is awesome. You know how big of a dream it is for me to drive a car like this on the street? The F1 seemed untouchable throughout 1995, and their victory at Le Mans was like this car receiving its crown on the throne. That is, until 1996 rolled around, and another company came along and said, I'm sorry. Maybe you've heard of this company. I don't know. They're called Porsche. They've been racing their cars in the GT2 class, but after they saw what McLaren was doing, they decided to dip their toes in, and in 1996, debuted a 3.2 liter, twin turbocharged, flat six powered Porsche 911 GT1.
Behind, the Porsche continued on its serene way, and qualified 3 seconds faster than the field.
Van Wolk aan het eind van de eerste rit.
Doesn't unload the rear axle, but instead creates the possibility of increasing downforce through the aerodynamic effect. As speed rises.
Now, I'm sure that just by looking at it, you can tell that by this point, a few people figured out how to bend the rules. At first glance, this car looks nothing like the 993 Carrera that it's based off of. And honestly, calling these the same car is just a bit of a stretch. The real controversy came in the fact that this car is actually mostly based off of Porsche's 962 Group C race car. From my understanding, they just took the chassis of one of these, cut the front end off of it, and swapped it for a 993 front end, put a different body on it with 993 headlights and taillights, and called it good. And then along the way, someone must have reminded them that these cars still have to be homologation cars. Porsche had thrown this car together because they needed something to compete with McLaren, and they needed it now. McLaren didn't have to stress about this because, these are still the same cars. One of them just has some added bits of aero. But you're telling me that Porsche was going to walk into the FIA office with pictures of both of these cars and tell them, guys, I swear it's the same car.
What?
Obviously, this wasn't going to cut it. So Porsche was basically forced to go ahead and make the 911 GT1 Strassen version. I'm not going to try to say it in German, okay? And this car was based on the 996 Carrera Porsche. Porsche was just trying to make a car that could compete with McLaren, and they bent a lot of the rules and did whatever they could to make this thing. And it was very clearly its own thing. So they basically just had to leave the car the way it is for the road legal version. They were nice enough to give the car AC and a stereo, but I mean, come on. You're really gonna put some bullshit on the radio instead of listening to this? This car was a big success on the track though, and for the next couple seasons, Porsche was now constantly battling McLaren for the top spot, finally securing a 1-2 finish with this car at the 1998 24 Hours of Le Mans. You could argue that maybe they might have cheated by taking an already existing purpose-built race car and passing it off as a modified road car, but hey, they didn't break any rules, and nonetheless, we were left with an amazing machine because of this. Now these two are amazing machines, but there's one more icon of this era that I have to mention, the one that is my favorite of this era. With the 1996 FIA GT1 season being largely dominated by McLaren and Porsche, another manufacturer decided to join in and see what all the fuss was about. A manufacturer that goes by the name Mercedes-Benz. I think they saw what Porsche did and thought, well, if they can get away with doing that, surely we can do something just as crazy, right? They got to work building a machine that could compete with the other two dominant forces. And seemingly just like Porsche remembered last minute about the homologation rules. They took a look outside of the window of their factory, saw a CLK parked in the lot, gave it a good look and said, hold on. The result was the Mercedes-Benz CLK GTR.
Follows the Mercedes into the chicane, that wonderful looking Mercedes. They're going up to 165, 170 miles an hour in the rain. As Peter Cox gets on the brakes, the Mercedes goes ahead. The Mercedes leads. Bernd Schneider retakes the lead.
Powered by a mid-mountain 6-liter V12 paired to a 6-speed sequential transmission, this car shares exactly nothing with the standard CLK aside from the headlights and the taillights. Just like the 911 GT1, this thing is pretty much a purpose-built race car, and as you might expect, there's very little about this thing that separates it from its track version, aside from AC and radio as well. It even still uses the sequential manual gearbox that's in the race car. This car was also offered in a Roadster if you really want to enjoy the sounds of that AMG V12. I love this thing. I absolutely love it. I think it looks so sick and just sounds so cool. It may not have had like the same level of success as the 911 and the F1, but I don't know. This car to me is just still so cool. This car and the 911 are so crazy to me because these legitimately are cars that were built with the intention of competing on the track first and being a road car second, or really more like 27th. The F1 was a supercar that was already built and had been modified to compete. These two are like the other way around. And Porsche were kind of the ones that started this whole, thing about these cars barely being one of their production vehicles. Like we saw earlier, cars up to the F1 were pretty much all modified versions of existing cars until teams realized that they could kind of do whatever they want. In 1997, Lotus came through with their Elise GT1, which was kind of on the same page as the last two in terms of having very little resemblance to the road car. In 1998, Toyota came in with their GT1, which I think there is literally only one road legal version. Yeah, the production number requirements were pretty, laughably enforced. This isn't even based on anything. It literally just looks like a prototype Le Mans car. Same deal with the Nissan R390, another really insane car that is somehow road legal. It's crazy to me that you could see any of these just driving around town. Past this era though, going into the 2000s, GT1 kind of started to wind down and the rules started to become more strict. Most of the cars from this point on were what you would expect, modified versions of their normal road-going counterparts. I think the most insane example of a GT1 homologation car from the 2000s is the Maserati MC12. This thing is still absolutely insane, and I think its size and shape definitely makes it easy to pair with the 911 and CLK. There's also the Celine S7, an American-made supercar that seems very much forgotten about these days, which is kind of sad. This car was very iconic in the early 2000s. I remember seeing this car in a lot of video games, magazines, and calendars. Nice. These two stand out to me because just like the 911 and CLK, there's very little different between these and their on-track variants. All the other cars in this class at this point were very clearly different from the production version, but these were basically the same. Since then, there hasn't really been too much out there like these. A few manufacturers have made legitimate track cars that their customers could buy, but these were not street legal and you had to have the car taken to the track if you wanted to drive them. A couple examples are the McLaren P1 GTR and the Ferrari FXXK and FXXK Evo. That is really hard to say. But don't worry. Thankfully, there are still a few modern day cars that exist that fit what we're looking for. Now these cars, I don't really know what to classify them as because they're kind of in their own segment. And you'll see what I mean. Let's say that for whatever reason, these homologation GT1 cars are still too soft for you. Maybe you want something even more intense and visceral. Maybe you want something closer to driving a real F1 car. Well, look no further than the BAC Mono. One of these is probably going to be as close as you're going to get to a single-seater open-wheel car on the streets. And it definitely does a pretty good job at it. I mean, I don't think there's really much I can say. I mean, just look at it. Everything about it is just straight-up race car. This thing has a 2.5-liter four-cylinder making 315 horsepower, which on the surface doesn't sound like much until you take into consideration that it only weighs just under 1,300 pounds. Another similar car to this is the KTM Crossbow. The older one, I should add. We'll come back to the new one soon. Just like the BAC, This car prioritizes low weight and handling over straight up power. The standard version has a 2-liter turbo inline 4 with 237 horsepower, with the later R model bumping that up to 300. This car is a little more chill than the BAC, I'd say, but you know, that's not to say that it's anything like a normal road car. I mean, these things don't even have a roof or a windshield. There's also the Caterham 7 and the Ariel Atom, two more open-top two-seaters. All of these fit in line with the whole race car now, road car later mentality. They're not trying to hide what they're really made for. These cars are built purely for the reason of driving and motorsport. Sure, the homologation specials were made with only motorsport in mind, but they partially exist because they had to. These exist because the people who made them wanted them to. A lot of cars like this don't really exist much these days because car companies are more concerned with what will make profit. That's kind of why it seems like a lot of manufacturers are seemingly killing off a lot of their fun cars in general. Cars like that were made for enthusiasts like us, but we're an extremely small portion of the car buying market. And oftentimes for these companies, making a car that appeals to us usually ends up being more of a financial risk to these companies. So a manufacturer making a crazy racing-derived car for the general public just for fun seems totally impossible these days. Thankfully, there's a few companies out there that still like to have a little fun every now and then. There is one modern day car that I think was able to capture the same raw, unfiltered, true race car experience that those GT1 specials had. The Aston Martin Valkyrie. Just look at this thing. Looks alone, this already looks like a prototype race car. This thing is powered by a 6.5 liter naturally aspirated V12 paired to a hybrid electric motor to bring the power output to 1,139 horsepower. In a road car. This thing weighs just under 3,000 pounds, and if it wasn't clear by the way the car looks, aerodynamics and handling were a big focus. Everything else is what you would expect from a true race car. Stiff suspension, single clutch auto manual transmission, a steering wheel that looks straight off an F1 car, no interior installation so the car has headsets for the driver and passenger, and plenty of other, you know, race car things. This thing is truly insane, and it's perfectly street legal in countries outside the US. You see, aerodynamics were such a big part of this car's development that instead of using traditional mirrors, the Valkyrie has little cameras that pop out of the sides and pop back in. Hey guys, editing track here, making yet another appearance because I always had to fix this mistakes. Damn. Yeah, so as you can clearly tell from the footage, the cameras are actually fixed in place on this car. I was getting confused with the McLaren Speedtail, which does retract the cameras. Also, shout out to Doug DeMuro for the footage here. Believe it or not, I don't have access to a car like this. Yeah, crazy, I know. And Doug DeMuro is like the only person who like points little things out like this in his video, so yeah, shout out to him. Anyways, back to the video. Here in the US, cars are required to have actual side mirrors that are fixed in place, but in the UK, this car is completely road legal. Regardless, it's still possible to import one to the US under show and display, so you could still throw a plate on this thing and cruise around town. Absolutely insane. Now remember earlier I said we'd be coming back to KTM, and that's because they decided to bring back the crossbow in the form of the GT-XR. This thing uses Audi's 2.5 liter turbo 5-cylinder making 500 horsepower and weighs about 2,500 pounds. And just like the Valkyrie, this thing looks picked straight off the track, inside and out. This car doesn't have doors. You know how you get in? The entire pod around the driver raises up so you can climb in. This thing is so cool, it's like a damn spaceship, which I guess you could really say about all of these, really. Now there's one more car I wanted to talk about that is a really recent example. This was another car that was made just because they felt like it. The Ford Mustang GTD. This Mustang is based off of Ford's GT3 race car, and just like the homologation specials, this car makes more power than its on-track version, with the race car making 550 horsepower, and the GTD, which must I remind everyone is a road legal car, making 800 horsepower. Now, I will say that this car has definitely been significantly softened up from the full race version to kind of make the experience more tolerable for average people. There's a full interior, AC, a radio, cup holders, and all the other creature comforts and driving aids that you see in many modern sports cars, and the interior is mostly unchanged from the standard Dark Horse. The performance is really where this car starts along with its track version, with a rear-mounted transaxle and onboard suspension that you can actually see from the interior. Honestly, this car, in my opinion, is much closer to something like an STO or a GT3 or GT2 RS, but for some reason, this car to me kind of has more of that spirit that some of the other cars that I've talked about has. And at the end of the day, Ford really didn't have to make this. This car is expensive to make and expensive to sell. The only people who are going to buy this thing are enthusiasts. But just like McLaren did with the F1 GTR, Ford looked at their Mustang GT3 and said, you know what? This car's so awesome, I want to drive it on the road. And honestly, In a day and age where most companies like Ford would rather play it safe and just make another hybrid or electric crossover, seeing them go against the grain and do something like this just makes me happy.
Twisting, lunging section of the corkscrew, of course.
So those were some examples of true race cars for the road. Some made out of passion, some made due to rules, but regardless, I think many of us car enthusiasts can agree that we wish there were more of these. I know when I was a kid, I always wanted to, and honestly still want to, drive a real race car. A true, proper GT car. And even though I'm still way too poor to even drive any of these street legal versions, it's still cool to see that the possibility to experience a car like that on the streets does exist. So yeah, the next time you see a GT3 owner brag about how their 911 with full interior, air conditioning, heated seats, adaptive cruise control, and parking assist is a race car for the road, just know that they have it easy. I'm not saying that car isn't insane, by the way, it's still a crazy ass car. All right, see y'all later.